Coming up next during this Sexy and Disabled conversation.
There has to be some level of acceptance of myself in order for me to put myself out there first, right? So there's that level. And then there has to be another level of acceptance that's unlocked in order to really know what it is that I would what I wanted and what I did not want, what I wouldn't settle for. That took another level of acceptance. And I say that it wasn't like I fully accepted myself. I mean, at the time, I thought that I had I accept myself if someone were to ask me that question. But it wasn't until life continued to unfold and different things came about that I really started to realize that there were more layers to the onion, if you will, that I needed to kind of peel back when it came to accepting myself as someone with a disability, and not just accepting, but even loving that part of me. And that was a lot of work.
We're going to talk about what it means to find acceptance and love with a disability today. So, Michelle, immediately, right when you hear me say that, what comes up for you?
Finding love with a disability. And I think what comes up for me immediately is just my personal experience, that it really started with my ability to accept myself. And I would be lying if I were to say that I fully accepted myself and then I finally found love. But it did not work like that. But it was, progress was made in accepting who I was as someone with a disability. And I truly believe that that part of it was a really important piece of the puzzle that needed to happen before I was able to be in the relationship that I'm currently in with my husband.
So, I think it's interesting that you said it wasn't about the full acceptance. Like, what was that journey like as far as how much acceptance do you think there was that got you to the point where I would imagine it led to action?
Yeah, I think you're right on it with that, because there has to be some level of acceptance of myself in order for me to put myself out there first, right? So there's that level. And then there has to be another level of acceptance that's unlocked in order to really know what it is that I would what I wanted and what I did not want, what I wouldn't settle for. That took another level of acceptance. And I say that it wasn't like I fully accepted myself. I mean, at the time, I thought that I had I accept myself if someone were to ask me that question. But it wasn't until life continued to unfold and different things came about that I really started to realize that there were more layers to the onion, if you will, that I needed to kind of peel back when it came to accepting myself as someone with a disability, and not just accepting, but even loving that part of me. And that was a lot of work for me.
All right, I love that because you kind of segued. I got a couple of questions written down for this one, and that kind of segued into something that I wrote down, and it says, which one comes first? acceptance or love?
Hmm. You mean love of self or acceptance of self or external, like someone accepting me, someone loving me? What comes first?
I think when I think of that question, I think of the self, but I think it also applies to the other, the external as well. When I think about it, I think acceptance has to come before the quote love comes, because if I don't accept myself for who I am, then how can I show myself love? And how can anybody else show me love? Because I think my ability to accept love only comes from my capacity to know that I am loved by myself. So if I don't
Hmm.
feel loved by myself, I can't see it coming from other people. I can't recognize it.
Yeah, I would agree with that statement. But then I also, just hearing it, I also think that my capacity to love other people at times is way bigger than my the love that I show for myself. Like I feel like sometimes my ability to love others is just like this unending thing, whereas there are still things that I'm working on personally to really, I don't know if it's accept anymore. I feel like I have a good level of acceptance, but maybe like love comes after that, where it's like, not only have I accepted this, but I actually appreciate it and I love this about me. And
Mm,
oftentimes those are things that we don't like, you know?
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, you know, another thing that I've got here is like, I think in order to find that love and acceptance with a disability, right? I think that I have to have love and acceptance for my disability to find it with my disability. And so that kind of, you saying what you said makes me think, what are the parts of myself, when specifically when it comes to my disability, that I shy away from, because that's what I've been taught to do to protect myself. And I'm in that survival mode.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think that's the hard part about this for anybody, is it requires, from my perspective, a level of honesty to say, hey, this is what's scary to me. And this is ultimately what I think is standing in my way when it comes to finding the love I want or the acceptance I want. And I think it also, we seek it so much externally because we've been told and shown that we don't matter so much externally, that we have to be like, I have to prove to
Mm-hmm.
everybody that told me and showed me that I was only worth this much, that they're wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For me, I don't I don't naturally go into that proving people wrong realm. Um, I I kind of wish I did, to be honest, because then I would have a little bit more motivation for change a little bit quicker, because it would be like, well, I just got to prove everybody wrong. For me, instead, I kind of shift into this other side of, well, they must be right. And so there's a trusting of what is said about me instead of what I believe about me. So then I'm having to really grapple with knowing and feeling in my body that one thing is true, but then also putting so much faith in what is told to me that I betray myself. So, and it feels like a betrayal when I'm saying, oh, you're right, and I go along with what's said. Does that make sense?
So let's dive into that for a second to kind of get more clarification. So it feels like a betrayal, right? And you said, like, almost sounded to me like the inner voice is going on. So you feel that, and you kind of go along with what they've said and fall into that betrayal. But what's the that inner voice conversation that's happening that says, hey, this, the way you're feeling about yourself is right, and what they're saying is wrong. So what's that conversation like?
So honestly, there has always been for me this level of like confidence internally, though, because I felt like I'm a good person. I know that I'm like fun to be around. I'm confident in who I am. I know, maybe it's not confidence. I know who I am. I know who I am, and I know how to show up as who I am. And I know that when I show up as me, people like that person. But things that I had learned was, oh, well, you can't show up as like confident you're in a wheelchair. Like, no, girl, like this is going to make people uncomfortable. You can't flirt with a guy because he's going to be super uncomfortable that he's being flirted with by this girl in a wheelchair. So then I just wouldn't. And I thought that that was like what I had to do to not make somebody else uncomfortable. Now, of course, as an adult, I realize that if somebody's uncomfortable with that, maybe that's their stuff and not my stuff, and I don't have to take on other people's stuff in order to protect them. And so my responsibility as an adult is to show up as authentic me, and then everybody else's responsibility is to decide for themselves if they want to be around me or not. And that's okay. But if I'm automatically preventing them by not showing up as me, I'll never truly know if somebody wants to be with me, because I'm like stopping it before it even has the ability to happen.
Yeah. Yep.
And so if I did have this thought of like, let me prove someone wrong, maybe I would have been the loud person, the extrovert that I actually am a lot sooner, rather than it taking until my 20s for me to just be like, I'm done, and I have to be me. Masking up is exhausting. It is not fun. And I'm just going to be me. And so that's really when I started having more relationships. And it's because when you show up as your authentic self, it's attractive. It's not like I all of a sudden had this glow up. I for sure didn't. For sure. That didn't happen. Like, I didn't even have a hair straightener, Nathan, for like a long time. Poor girl.
Oh, man.
So it's, yeah. I think when you show up as authentic you, however you present, people are attracted to that. Now, I will say that it kind of was like an overnight decision, because I was like done and just, I became allergic to it, you know? Like I was just like, I'm allergic to being that person. I cannot do it anymore. And so it really was like a shift of overnight. I just had to be me. But the process of loving myself and accepting myself was certainly not an overnight thing, because I essentially like became who I wanted to be, but it was like I was just born. I was just baby me at that point. I had a lot of learning to do. And
Yeah.
it was through relationships that I learned how to love myself. So when I'm working with people that are like, oh, I have to do XYZ before I can get in a relationship, like I have to have a certain percentage of healing before I can get in a relationship, like, yes and no. I don't think that we're ever going to be like completely where we need to be in order to get in a relationship, because of how we can learn to love and be loved and receive love, oftentimes only by doing it, you know?
Yeah, like so that made me think of like relationships are often going to be the thing that provide what we think we're waiting, like the perfect thing we're waiting for. Because, like you said, we have to be in the act of doing it. And maybe that relationship that you're holding back from is something that who the hell knows how long a relationship is going to be. And I mean, we've talked about this plenty of times before. We are the masters as people with disabilities to take everything to the storybook ending, or the ending that we take it all the way to the end.
Yep.
And like, who actually knows? But what if that relationship that you're holding yourself back from is going to be a tool in your healing, because that person is going to reflect back to you exactly what you need to see for where you are right now in your journey of life.
Absolutely. And I did, of course, the same thing of wanting the storybook, like I'm going to meet the person and then we're going to get married and and I, you know, I subscribe to that, especially because my parents, like the model that I had, they were childhood sweethearts. Like captain of the cheerleading squad meets captain of the football team
Oh
at
boy.
16 years old, you know? So when 16 rolled around for me, I was like, oh, I'm so excited. My Prince Charming is going to come this year because this is how it happens,
Oh god.
obviously. And so needless to say, that's not how that's not reality for everyone. It's reality for some people, but that's not reality for everybody.
Yeah.
And it was kind of like hard to see that I didn't meet this like benchmark that I had really just given myself. But we do.
Yeah.
We give ourselves benchmarks based on our peers or based on other things that we've seen. And some of that is through just social media or things in on TV, and it's really difficult, especially when you aren't fitting into what society is like painting the picture of. So it's hard to know what is possible for you and what is not realistic, what's realistic, and is it all possible or is nothing possible? It's kind of confusing.
Yeah. Well, so I think everybody wants to know, did your dad ever go to the window and hold up a boombox? And like, so I think that's the question on everybody's mind. You'll have to find that out if you don't know already and get back to us. But I want to pause right now about the benchmark thing, because I think that's something that people can take action on right now to kind of see where you are on this spectrum of love and acceptance, and
Mm,
actually think to yourself, hey, what benchmarks did I have in my mind that were going to happen? How did I feel when they didn't happen?
mm.
And like, was it the end of the world? Guess what? You're still here. It wasn't the end of the world. And like, how do I look at that and say, you know what? It didn't happen. That's okay. I'm still okay. And like, we have to start, I believe, defining love and all these things. We have to start defining it for ourselves, not what we see everybody else doing. We have to look at it and say, okay, here's what I thought the benchmarks were.
Mm-hmm.
But let's just say, like, again, taking it to the end of the road, somebody, they want to be married, but they haven't even gone on a date. Like,
And
there's
that's
huge,
common.
yeah, that's a huge gap, right? So maybe it's saying, okay, I haven't met this benchmark yet. No, age is just a number that we made up as humans anyway, and saying, oh, well, you know what? It's going on a date, regardless of whether you believe it right now or not, is a lot easier than taking it all the way to I'm married and have kids and whatever that end story looks like for you. So I think you have to start redefining those benchmarks as one thing to do.
I definitely agree with that. But even as you were sharing that and you were like, you survived, right? Like it wasn't the end of the world. And I thought back to just times when there have been some sort of expectation that I created, whether it was a longing and a hoping for like a relationship to work out with this one person, you know? And maybe we like there have been multiple times where it was like I've never even talked to this person, but in my head I was like, oh my gosh, I could just see that we would be so great, you know. And then my shyness would keep me from even talking to them. So literally, this isn't going to happen. But then, as you do move through, there are other relationships where you do go through stages and steps, and then you are like thinking about the benchmarks within those relationships. And I just was thinking like how sometimes that story and those expectations, we can be so wrapped up in the things that have not happened yet and just long
Mm-hmm.
for those things so much that when they don't happen, there's like an actual grieving process that is happening for
Yeah.
these things that we've told ourselves in our brain and we've felt in our body, that we've essentially like felt them so we believe them to have been real and possible, and we're really just fantasizing, right? Because
Yeah.
it's more fun to fantasize than to possibly take action and risk rejection. And sometimes we're doing both at the same time, but I think it's really important as we look at redefining what it is that we're wanting, that we're kind of taking it into what it would look like in this present moment, and really trying to make sure that we're not living in the future of all that could be.
Yeah.
And I think it's really easy to do that.
Yeah. I mean, that our whole last conversation that we had was about this very thing of, do you ever mourn the potential of the person
Yeah.
you could have been without your disability, right? So that speaks into that again, but it's a very strong narrative. And you spoke into rejection, and this is something that I'm getting more and more clear on as I continue to do this work, as we continue to have conversations, and like connection to me now is really about my ability to face my own rejection.
Yeah.
Like that is really what all of this is. It's you looking at you and saying, what parts of myself am I rejecting right now? And why am I doing that? Like, that's a scary, scary conversation to have. And that's why I think a lot of times people isolate and they experience loneliness specifically longer than they have to, because it's like, no, I don't want to deal with this right now, Nathan. I don't know how to communicate what's happening, but I know that in order to do it, it's going to force me to deal with something that I'm not ready to deal with. And I think that's a lot of what stops people in this area as well. Like it's forcing you to deal with something that you're like, I'm scared to know what's going to happen if I try and do this.
Yeah. And, this isn't just for people with disabilities, because I know a lot of people, especially lately, that life is really like a when it rains, it pours type of scenario. And I know a lot of people that are overwhelmed right now to the point where they are being faced with new fears of like, I almost fear having to either be rejected, or I fear one more thing going wrong because I just can't take another loss, And I think that people with disabilities, especially if you're dealing with chronic pain, maybe it's the narrative of, I just can't be in pain in one more spot in my body. Like my heart needs to not be in pain. I don't want a broken heart, so I'm just not going to do that to myself. Or maybe it's like, I just can't take another, like another thing going wrong. And so I can really appreciate that, why we would self-protect. And that's really a trauma response. So again, a lot of trauma is involved with living with a disability. But I mean, at this point, we are living in a pretty traumatized world, right? So I think if we all just pause for a moment, we could really relate on that level. But also, staying in that fantasy land of the future is also a trauma response, because we do that when current reality does not feel safe, right? So we'll just paint this other world over here that we can live in and feel good. And so it's really got to be a conscious thing of like grounding ourselves in the present moment and being able to recognize exactly what you said, where how am I rejecting myself? What parts of myself am I rejecting? And then what's that piece that's going to propel me in the direction of facing that fear? What's going to propel me into action? Do I need accountability? Do I need support? What is it that I need in order to move forward?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I was just talking to somebody else the other day, specifically about men and love and relationships. And we were talking about how men and women, we approach them differently because we're different. And it kind of made me think of when we were talking about, like, could you be the person, or who would you have been if you were the person that was like the first response was, I'm going to prove them wrong, right? And that just made me think. I know we're going back a little bit, but it made me think, like, I wonder if that is a, like, because I definitely go there. Like that would be my immediate. Yeah, it's
not a shock.
So it's a very, like, you can't stay in that mode. It's not healthy to stay in proving people wrong. But if you're looking to get something started, that's a quick way to ignite it and be like, oh yeah, that's happening. But I wonder if that's like men would respond that way as to where women are going to respond different and not go into that I have something to prove somebody wrong with.
It's possible. I think you are touching on a good research project. But I would say that in my experience in teaching, actually, when I would talk to my students about like what is propelling them forward in pursuing their career, and I taught for about 10 years, and it was all creative students. So they were either trying to be like the next music producer, or they're trying to create like the next hot game, or, you know, they were doing audio production, or, you know, game art, graphic design. It was all like creative. And what that population would say was that, and that was kind of both men and women were saying that they resonated with this. I have to prove my parents wrong, or my family wrong, who said that like I shouldn't be going into this artistic career, you know, but I have to honor my gifts, you know. It's almost like back what I said, where it was like I had to be myself. I could no longer just do what I had been told by. And really, it wasn't really direct. It was very indirect messaging that I was going by. No one like flat out told me like, tone it down, girl, you're embarrassing this one. You know, nobody told me that. But I did pick up on the discomfort that people would feel just surrounding me whenever I was like present, which is just kind of sad to say, but it was there, you know?
Oh, no, yeah. I've been in that, like, I've experienced that too, where
Yeah.
you are just yourself, and it is really strong when you can do that. And I think that feeling of like embarrassment or whatever the other people are feeling, it's just because we're reflecting parts of them that they don't feel safe showing to other people in the moment, and they're like, I don't, yeah, I could never do that. So if I could never do that, you shouldn't be able to do that either.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, 100%. I had a lot
Uh,
of like relationships that never saw daylight. They were only like, I'll talk to you on the phone all hours of the night, but I don't like you and we can't hang out anywhere, you know? Like, so that was messaging to me that I was like making somebody uncomfortable. And so instead of saying like,
instead of saying "fuck you,"
I'm glad that you swore, because I was going to say like, instead of saying like, he's a dipshit, I instead said, oh, it's me, and I'm just like gross. And, you know, it's different. Like some people will internalize and some people will say, that's on you. I was the type to internalize it.
so let's pause again right there and ask the question to the audience: which one of those people are you? Because I think that's important to acknowledge, like to
Mm-hmm.
actually sit and say, out of what we've talked about right now, which of those people are you? Because depending on that is going to shift what you may need to shift to find what it is you're actually looking for.
Right. Right.
Um, so you know what's interesting when people, because we had people vote on this, right? And this is the topic that they said they wanted to hear us talk about. But when I looked at everybody who was voting, as far as I know, majority of the people voting did not have disabilities or do not have disabilities. They're not visible, or they haven't talked about having them. And so I wonder, I think acceptance and love is an important topic for anyone, but I
Mm.
wonder what it is about hearing from two people who are experiencing this life as a disabled person that kind of sparked their interest. And I'm just curious, like, what do you think after hearing that most people that voted on it don't have disabilities? What do you think about
I think that we really have shared experiences as humans, and like certain things, because of our little groupings that we all get, like we're in the little like physical disability group over here, certain things get magnified.
that? Mm-hmm.
And so it's almost like we have additional factors that we have to consider when it comes to these things that they might not. And so they're able to then maybe see, if they're like looking at all of these things and it's a big struggle here and I can gain some knowledge from them,
Yeah.
then maybe I can apply that in my own life and it'll be pretty successful because they've looked at even more factors than I have to. That's how I
Yeah.
might see it.
Yeah. I like that idea of the factors that may be different, but I also think that my hope is that if anybody's been listening to us for a long period of time, and you're one of the people that don't have disabilities, I hope that you do gain some new perspective and ultimately walk away with what Michelle said, in the fact that we may think that there's lots of differences, but ultimately it's not really that different. Just some of the circumstances change how we navigate certain things.
Mm-hmm.
But the experience ultimately isn't that different. And I think the same goes for all of our people that are living with disabilities and people in the community. Like, I think we also give too much power to the difference that we've created with how we are viewing our own disability, to say, oh, yeah, well, they just don't understand. Well,
Mm-hmm.
maybe you're not communicating it well, because, yes, they don't have the same circumstances that we do, but chances are they've dealt with something that created a similar feeling, emotion in their life. And so if you've experienced that, then you can relate.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm sure some of it is in order to be inspired, right? We're trying often
Oh
to
boy.
inspire, yeah, I know, inspire action within ourselves. And so, and just for those who don't know, Nathan said, oh boy, because the term inspiration porn is something that we often deal with in the disability community, where there are images or stories about overcoming obstacles that are used for inspiration purposes. And can it be used in a way that's like negative? Yeah. But I think in the same way that if I want, let's just say I want to start a business and I feel like this is just something that I can't do and I'm really trying to get inspired to do it. I want to listen to someone's story of how they did it. But do I want to listen to the person who, like, their whole family bloodline were all entrepreneurs and they just basically helped this person along and they gave them the money and that's it? No, I want to hear from the person that had to teach themselves like a second language in order to, had to walk uphill both ways. Like, I want to hear about that so that I can say, if they could do it, I could do it. So I can appreciate how that psychologically inspires us to take action. Now, if it's done in a way where it's like, oh, at least I'm not that person, so I can totally do this. It's all in the way that it's presented.
Yeah. And maybe I just said, oh boy, because if I would have known, I would have changed my wardrobe and I would have worn my shirt, okay?
And I would know that if I could see you, but I still can't. So
no. I agree with that wholeheartedly. It's about finding people that you relate to on some level, and we're so quick as humans to make those snap judgments, and sometimes we just don't hear anything out because we've been like, oh, this is what I see, this is what it is, so I'm not even going to be curious about what it could be. I've already made up my conclusion, and I think that's kind of a perfect way, I think, to bring this conversation to an end. And let's just say right now, what do you, as the person watching and listening, like, how do you define love and acceptance? What are your current conclusions that you've created about love and acceptance? And I'd love to hear from you, Michelle, kind of maybe there are some questions that we can give people to ask to start to shake those conclusions a little bit.
Mm-hmm. I really love scaling questions because they're a way for us to track our growth and just our shift, because we can go either up or down on the scale, and then be able to see why. Like, why am I really feeling high on this whole acceptance scale today? Like, from 0 to 10, maybe I'm feeling like a 7 today. Well, what contributed to that? Because I need more of it. And I need to make sure that I create more opportunities for that number to continue to kick up on the scale. But you're also going to notice, because life, that it may go down. And so checking in with yourself regularly, so you could be like, oh, I'm a 3 today. Well, that's a big jump. Like, what happened? What was it? A certain person that you're hanging out with? Do you notice that you kind of feel this way a lot around this person? Or were you taking action? Did that bring your acceptance level higher? Like, did putting yourself out there feel good? Did it feel bad? And then just being able to look at where you're at and how it's feeling, especially on that scale of love, self-acceptance, and just being able to track that and get in touch with your own feelings, I think are really important, because it leads us to see what we need to do to get where we want to be.
Yeah. I love that, because changing both of these ideas for ourselves, it requires acknowledgement, but it also requires action. Mm-hmm. You can't just think about what you want to be different. If you truly want it to be different, you have to be courageous enough to take action on that. And that doesn't even mean that the action is going to work out in the way that you think it's going to work out. But
Mm-hmm.
even if it doesn't, it alters what you believe about yourself, because at the end of the day, you took action on a promise that you made to yourself. And that's really, to me, what love and acceptance truly is to be able to sit and to keep promises with the person I look into the mirror and see every day and say, yeah, if there's one person I'm going to maintain integrity with at all costs, is going to be the person that stares me back in the mirror every day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love that. And I especially love that because I'm finally like fully embracing that too. And so to be not called out by that statement feels really good, I will say.
All right, I've loved this conversation, and we love when you guys are involved in these conversations. So make sure that you are following us on our social media handles. So, Michelle, where can the people find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Instagram as Dr. Finan and my website, drfinan.com, and on Facebook, of course.
Yeah, and you can find me at The Real Nathan Todd on Instagram and The Loneliness Coach everywhere else. But make sure, if you have ideas for things that you would love to hear us talk about, drop us a message over on any of those profiles, and we will be happy to share our thoughts, our experiences with you on those ideas that you have.